It never ceases to amaze me just how much we can learn from like totally different fields. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like who would have thought that machine learning could give us clues about how we learn, how humans learn.
Yeah.
But that's what we're looking at today.
Right.
You got this paper, what you can learn about human learning from machine learning. And this is going to be a good one.
It's an interesting one for sure. It's like machine learning is, holding a mirror up to how our minds work, maybe.
Yeah,
Helps us see things a little differently.
it gives us a new perspective, right?
Yeah.
So the paper starts off as talking about patterns and how machines, they're great at spotting these patterns in data. But as it turns out, so are we.
Yeah.
We do it all the time without even thinking about it.
It's true. Like, how did you learn what a dog was? You didn't read it in the dictionary.
Right.
You just saw a bunch of dogs.
Yeah.
Big ones, small ones, fluffy ones, short legs.
And eventually you're like, okay, they all kind of have the same.
Yeah. There's something similar about all these.
Something that connects them, yeah.
Even though they all look really different.
Yeah, like our brains are these incredible pattern recognition things.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, that's where this idea of abstraction comes in, which is something the paper talks about.
Okay.
That we do and that machines can do, which is, that we can take these specific examples, like a fluffy dog or a short-legged dog, and kind of extract some general principles of what makes a dog a dog.
Okay. So it's not just about recognizing the patterns, it's about understanding why those patterns exist. Like what's the deeper structure?
So structure underneath.
But why is that so important, especially when we're talking about learning?
Well, I think it's important because it lets us use what we know in situations that are totally new, maybe situations we haven't been in before.
Okay.
Right. So if I can kind of abstract the underlying principles of something, then it's not just memorizing a bunch of fact. It's more like I'm building something that I can use in a bunch of different ways.
Okay.
And I think that's what's really important in a world that's changing all the time.
It's like if I can learn how to cook risotto and I use arborio rice.
Right.
Like I should be able to, if I understand the principles of it, use a different kind of rice and still kind of like make it work.
Exactly. You've got it. You understand the principle of risotto.
Right.
So you can apply that in all these different situations, even if they're a little bit different.
Okay.
And that ability to take what you learn and use it in a different situation, that's another thing that humans and machines have in common, according to this paper.
Okay, so we're not just talking about patterns in one specific area. It's like how those patterns connect all the things in our lives.
Exactly. Like, you learn to play the piano. That might actually help you if you decided to pick up the guitar.
Right.
Because you've already got some of the basics down.
Those building blocks.
The building blocks of music, exactly.
Yeah. But it's not always just about the what of learning. It's also about the where and the when. Like the context of when you're learning is important. And that's something I thought was really cool that this paper brought up.
Yeah. The context is huge, and they emphasize that for both human learning and machine learning.
Right.
Right. If you take a machine learning model and you give it data that is completely different from the data it was trained on, it's not going to do very well. And in the same way, if we learn information, but it's presented in a way that's totally different from anything we've experienced.
Right. It's not going to stick.
It's not going to stick.
You're like trying to learn a new language just by memorizing vocabulary.
Exactly.
It's not the same as actually using the language.
Exactly. You need that context.
You need to connect it to something.
And I think that's what makes it really powerful, is if we can connect what we learn to stuff we already know.
Right.
It's like it clicks into place.
Yes, exactly.
And it makes more sense.
I read this really interesting study about memory. And I was really trying to, remember stuff for this test.
Yeah.
And so because of that, because I was able to connect it to my own life,
Yeah.
it really stuck with me.
That's a great example of that. You're relating it to your own experience.
Yeah.
So it becomes more meaningful.
So we've got these three things. We've got recognizing the patterns, abstracting the deeper meaning behind them, and then putting it all in a context that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's some of the big stuff that stood out to me from this paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we see that in machine learning and human learning.
Yeah.
But the learning journey doesn't stop there, does it?
No, it doesn't.
We're constantly changing, growing. There's new information coming at us all the time.
Always.
So how do we stay flexible? How do we stay agile with all that? What does this paper say about that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not enough to just learn something once. We've got to be able to like roll with the punches. The world changes, there's new information, and we have to adapt. And that's where this idea of cognitive flexibility comes in, which is something this paper talks about as being really important if we want to keep learning our whole lives.
Cognitive flexibility.
Yeah.
Okay. So that sounds like something that we could all use a little more of.
Yeah.
Especially these days with how fast everything is moving.
Yeah.
What exactly is cognitive flexibility, though?
So basically, it's like hitting the refresh button on how you think about things.
Okay.
Being willing to update what you believe when you get new information, even if it means admitting you were wrong.
Yeah.
It's about being open to changing your mind.
So it's not just about adding new stuff to what you already know, but being open to rearranging it. Maybe even getting rid of some things that aren't true anymore.
Exactly. It's like we all have these ideas in our heads about how things work.
Yeah.
But sometimes we get stuck in those ideas, and we're not willing to let them go, even when the evidence says maybe we should do that. Cognitive flexibility is about being able to loosen that grip a little.
Be open to other possibilities.
Exactly. Like, remember back when everyone thought the world was flat?
Yeah.
It took some serious cognitive flexibility for people to accept that it's actually round.
Right. And those big shifts in how we see the world can be tough.
For sure.
But they can also be really important for moving forward.
Absolutely. They help us break free from old ways of thinking and open up to new possibilities.
Okay, so we're seeing how important it is to be adaptable, to keep learning and updating what we know. But with so much information out there, how do we even decide what to focus on?
That's another interesting parallel that comes up in the paper, the importance of focus.
Right.
Just like a machine learning model needs to filter out irrelevant data to get good results, we need to be able to focus our attention to learn effectively.
It's like it's saying too much information is the same as no information.
Exactly. If we're constantly bombarded with stuff, our brains can't process any of it effectively.
Right.
That's why this idea of selective attention is so important.
Selective attention.
It's about being intentional with where you direct your attention.
Okay.
Choosing to focus on the information that really matters to you and what you're trying to learn.
So it's not just about being able to focus in the moment, but actually choosing what you want to focus on.
Exactly. It's like you're in charge of what gets your mental energy.
That's a good way to put it. Though it feels like it's getting harder and harder these days with all the distractions.
It's true. Between social media, emails, notifications, it's like our brains are under constant assault.
No kidding.
But the good news is that we can train our brains to focus better.
Oh, could.
Just like a muscle gets stronger with exercise, our attention spans can improve if we put in the effort.
So it's not about being some kind of superhuman who never gets distracted.
Right.
It's more about noticing when you are distracted and gently bringing your attention back to what you're trying to focus on.
Exactly. It's about being mindful of where your attention is going.
Okay, that feels way more doable. But even when we are focused, there's another layer to this, right? It's not just about getting information into our brains.
Right.
It's about how we experience it. And this is where I thought the paper's discussion of multisensory learning was really fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Multisensory learning is huge. And the paper really digs into the science behind why it's so effective.
Because it's not just some trendy education fad or something.
Right. It's about how our brains are literally wired.
Yeah. Our brains are incredible at taking in information from all our senses and putting it all together.
Exactly. And when we use multiple senses while we're learning, we create these stronger connections in our brains.
So instead of just reading about something, you might also watch a video about it or even try to experience it yourself.
Precisely. And by doing that, by engaging those different senses, you're not just passively absorbing the information, you're actively making sense of it.
Okay, this is blowing my mind, but let's bring it back down to earth for a second. How do we know if all this learning is actually working? Like, how do we know if we're on the right track? Isn't feedback important for that?
You got it. The paper talks a lot about the role of feedback in both machine learning and human learning.
Makes sense.
Just like those machine learning models need data to adjust and get better.
Right.
We need feedback to figure out what we're doing well, what we need to work on, and how to keep improving.
It's like, imagine trying to learn how to dance without anyone telling you if you're on beat or if you've got two left feet.
Right.
You might think you're doing great, but without that outside perspective, you're probably not going to improve much.
Exactly. Feedback gives us that outside view that we need to see ourselves more objectively.
And the timing of that feedback is important too, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about getting feedback whenever. It's about getting the right feedback at the right time.
You got it. Think about learning a new language. If you make a grammar mistake, getting feedback right then and there is way more helpful than getting it weeks later.
It's like getting real-time coaching versus waiting for the game to be over.
Exactly. It makes a huge difference in how much you actually learn and remember.
But it can't be all criticism, can it? Don't we also need some positive reinforcement along the way?
Absolutely. The paper emphasizes that positive feedback is just as important as constructive criticism.
Okay.
Just like those machine learning models might get rewarded for making correct predictions,
Right.
we humans thrive on positive feedback. It keeps us motivated, builds our confidence, and helps us push through challenges.
So it's like we have to be our own cheerleaders.
Yeah,
Celebrating our successes as we go.
exactly. Recognizing and appreciating how far you've come, even those small victories, can make a world of difference.
It's easy to get bogged down in the things we haven't mastered yet.
Definitely.
But taking the time to appreciate how much we've learned, that's what keeps the learning process fun.
For sure. It's all about finding that balance.
But let's be real for a second.
Mm-hmm.
We all have our blind spots, right? Areas where maybe our own biases or assumptions are leading us astray.
Yeah.
And I thought the paper's discussion about bias was really interesting.
Yes.
It's like we don't know what we don't know.
Exactly. And sometimes those blind spots can really trip us up.
For sure.
The paper makes this point that's really interesting about how, machines can actually develop biases
Right.
based on the data that they're trained on.
Okay.
And humans were not so different.
Right.
If you think about it, like if you only ever get your news from one source,
Yeah.
you might start to think that that's the only way to see the world.
That's the only truth.
Yeah. And so just like those machine learning models,
Right.
we can end up with a really skewed perspective if we're not careful.
So what do we do about that? How do we make sure that we're not like stuck in an echo chamber of our own biases?
Oh, I think a big part of it is just being aware of it.
Okay.
Recognizing that we all have biases and that they can affect how we see things without us even realizing it.
That's the tricky part, right? Sometimes they're so ingrained that we don't even know they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. But the more we learn about our own biases, the more we can start to question our own assumptions and look for different points of view.
So it's about like actively seeking out other perspectives, even if they make us uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about being open to the possibility that maybe we don't have all the answers.
Being open to being wrong.
Yeah. And that's where that cognitive flexibility we talked about comes in handy.
Right.
It's about being willing to update our beliefs when we get new information, even if it means admitting we were wrong before.
It's like that feeling you get when you travel to a new place and you realize that people do things totally differently there.
Exactly.
It can be a little disorienting at first, but it's also incredibly eye-opening.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of embracing different perspectives.
Yeah.
It challenges us to grow and learn and become more well-rounded individuals.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about recognizing patterns, figuring out the deeper meaning behind them, putting it all into context, staying flexible, dealing with all the distractions out there, and recognizing our own biases.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's amazing how much we can learn about ourselves by looking at how machines learn.
It really is. It's like this whole new way of understanding how our brains work.
Right. And the best part is, these insights are available to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you need to be a computer scientist to benefit from this stuff.
Exactly. It's all about taking these principles and applying them to our own lives, whether we're trying to learn a new language, pick up a new skill, or just become more effective thinkers.
So true. Well, we've definitely given you a lot to chew on today. As we wrap up, we wanted to leave you with one final thought-provoking question. If machines can do such incredible things just by crunching data, what amazing things are we capable of when we combine that same power of learning with our own unique human qualities, like creativity and imagination?
It's something to ponder, for sure. The possibilities are truly endless.
That's it for this deep dive into the world of learning. We hope you enjoyed it and maybe even learned a thing or two along the way. Until next time, keep those minds open and never stop exploring.